So what do you think then about there's always going to be evaluation about special operations units, MARSOC versus Ranger versus whatever. There's always this versus, and there's not really a competition going on here. There is for dollars on occasion, but there has also been still this rumor that they're going to be evaluating at some point whether or not we need all of the different special operations that we currently have. What's your thoughts on that?
I think we've been talking about that for a long time, right? And I think for somebody to really pull the trigger on that, I mean, they've been talking about doing away with MARSOC since they started it up, and since it was born, right? And it's still around. And that command does great stuff. I know a lot of those guys. I know a lot of the command, and they do great stuff, right? And everybody, each of the tribes special operations tribes kind of has their specific deal, I think what they're really looking at is like, hey, where are we doing the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So like, hey, does SF need dive people when we have the SEALs and we got a MARSOC dive? Like, are we doing it, not picking on the dive community, but like those are kind of the conversations, right? Like, hey, are we doing, dual things that we could like save money and focus on something else, right? Yeah. And I think it just needs to be like, who's going to have that hard conversation and then like actually pull the trigger, and no one's really been able to do that yet. Yeah. So my opinion is, I mean, if where we are funding wise, what DOD is like looking for like at near peer stuff in the next wars and how we need to defend the country, like where do we need to really put our resources? Like where can we like move some money and move resources to something else?
I think when it became, it makes big sense. So I think when it became, really kinetic, there was a lot of people kicking in doors, and there were a lot of overlaps and stuff because you needed the manpower. That's when 18 X-ray really got big. We started getting a lot of SF. We needed those guys. And so I think what you're talking about is there's an evolution that always happens. This is the next iteration, the next evolution that we're discussing about how can special operations not step on one another unless it's needed, but where it's not, where can we find, parallel paths?
Yeah.
So there's synergies, and then sometimes there shouldn't be. And I think that's what you're kind of saying.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's an important factor. And you have a lot of guys they're looking at getting into the service that might be listening to this, and they're somewhat confused about the different special operations. I think at times each one of them has a role and responsibility. They all perform a really important role as well when the time comes. So we're not all competing, special operations, I should say. They're not all competing for the same opportunities, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. So, if you're out there and you're thinking about, coming into the, serving in the military and you're, which special operations unit, do I want to go to? You want to go to the 75th Ranger Regiment.